Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give everyone a minute or so just to be able to log on and join us tonight. Okay, to allow enough time and for those who were able to join us on time tonight, we'll get started and hope that more folks join us along the way. So welcome to our second college conversation series. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on emotional preparation for college, especially for students who are maybe starting prep in their senior year or students who may be starting their freshman year of college. All great and important information across the board. Just some housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. At the end, in about 2 or 3 days from now, when the recording is available, you'll get an email sharing that recording so you can watch it again or share with your child or any friends that may find it helpful. There is no chat feature enabled tonight, but there is the Q&A available. So please pop in any questions you have directly into the Q&A field, and there will be time for questions at the end. So I'm very lucky to be joined tonight by two wonderful panelists from Zucker Hillside Hospital who will be able to share with us this great information. So I have Dr. Laura Brader, who's the Assistant Vice President of the College Mental Health Program, and Dr. Britt Lippman, who's a Senior Psychologist with the Behavioral College Partnership. So Dr. Brader, Dr. Lippman, I will hand it right on over to you and we'll get started.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. We're really happy to be here tonight to talk about this topic. We work, actually, I'm a psychologist. About 12 years ago, I started the Behavioral Health College Partnership. And basically, that's a program that treats acute mental illness in college students. And that's not what we're talking about tonight. Actually, very few students are in need of crisis management and hospitalization. But over the years, we've learned a lot from our students. And as a parent and as a clinician, our students have taught us a lot. And we're going to share some research tonight on what we've studied about college students and our colleagues have studied. And we're also going to share some of the things that we've learned over the years by treating college students. So I'm going to start by talking about what is emotional preparedness. And the title of the presentation is Beyond the SATs and Academic Preparation, because I think, and as a parent, I know I got caught in the SAT taking numbers, essay writing, grade point average, Common App applications. And we end up talking about all these, are the academics going to get our child into school? And one of the things that after they finally do get into school, one of the things a lot of us are thinking is, are they really emotionally prepared? Can they do this? And will they get up? Will they actually get up? Will they stay in the room? I know I'm a psychologist. Just so you know, not all of us have perfect children. I was terrified my son wasn't ever going to leave his room. He's very quiet to himself. My daughter, I was terrified of the exact opposite thing. So when we're worried about emotional preparedness, and there might be college students or rising seniors into college on this webinar, what is that? And it basically is the ability to take care of yourself, or the feeling of being able to say, I got this, or at least knowing you know how to get to the answer. It's knowing that you can adapt to new environments, being able to control negative emotions and think clearly in the face of problem solving or building positive relationships. And I'm going to cover the first two, and I'm going to let Britt cover the second two. So why should we talk about this? So one of the things that is sometimes obvious, but not always, is that transitions are difficult. It's difficult for adults as well. It's not just college freshmen or entering college. It's a lot of new things at once. It's like changing relationships. It's having your family away for the first time, not having your mom waking you up, having to take care of yourself, maybe not just drinking sugary drinks, having greater independence, taking control over situations, navigating campus life, roommates, problem solving, and there's, your loneliness and sometimes homesickness. One thing we know is that college, usually in the first semester, there's at least a couple bumps or things that we have to adjust to. So one of the things that I like to share is what do college freshmen tell us? Because we could show all the statistics and everything, but when we're talking to our own teens or our own students, sometimes saying what their peers are saying is just much more impactful to them. So what are the college freshmen saying? And this came out of a poll that the Jed Foundation did with the Harris poll in 2015. Basically, what we found out from that, and I'm going to share a few things from it, is that 87% of college freshmen told us that almost all their prep focused on academics and ignored emotional concerns, which is interesting. That they were insightful enough to say, hey, I could have used help in this area. 60% wished that they were more emotionally prepared when they entered college. 50% said they were stressed most of or all the time. 35% felt that they were not necessarily in control of their day-to-day. And 50% said their independent living skills needed improvement. So we go on to the next slide. Here we're looking at what gets in the way of academic success. And it's typically not that students get into a school that they are not academically prepared to attend. What's much more likely to get in the way of academic success are these four things. And this is from a survey that is done nationally from the American College Health Association, which looks at and surveys college students across the country. So 30% of the leading, the leading impediments are 30% is stress, 21% anxiety, I better not touch that. 20% sleep problems and 14% depression. So when we're talking about emotional readiness, we also looked at in our Harris poll, what were some of the correlations? What were some of the things that were linked to low emotional readiness? One of them is lower GPA. Another one is they are more likely to regularly consume alcohol and drugs. A third is they're more likely to consider transfer to another school. And they are also more likely to rate their college experience as not pleasant, poor, or terrible. So I know most of us don't want the things on this slide to happen. So what do? How do we approach this? What are the things we could do? And when Britt and I were preparing, Dr. Lippman and I were preparing, we kind of like said, okay, we have 45 minutes to tell tips to students and parents. What are we going to tell? So we came up with our highlights, and then we broke them into two categories. and Dr. Lippman's going to handle the second one. I'm going to handle the first. But basically, they are the two things in preparing for college that we think that we fall into, that we need to develop, falls into two categories. One is a sense of mastery and independence, or self-efficacy, feeling like you can do things, you can figure things out. And the other one is the ability to care for self in both physical and emotional ways. And we're going to share how those are linked together. So sense of mastery, that's me. How do we develop mastery? So we looked at this from a few different angles. How do we instill mastery or a sense of I got this in our college students? Or how do we make people feel like they got this? So I think the three categories we broke it into are aligning expectations and validating concerns. 2, encouraging problem solving. And 3, cultivating practical life skills. Now, here's college life, freedom, right down the road, stress is there, and then the rest area is not for a while. So when I say talk about aligning expectations and validating concerns about college, what do we mean? Well, one is, and I always start with this because I think it's really important to align or keep college in perspective. Myself, my kids are going to school, I'm buying them bedding, we're buying things, they're going away. It looks like they're going to have the life of Riley. It's going to be all fun. I wish I was packing up to go with them. Didn't have all the responsibilities I have. But the reality is a lot of people and parents will say, these are going to be the best years of your life. You're going to love it. I loved college. And when we talk to students that are anxious or depressed, a lot of times we'll hear them say, I hate that people say these are the best years of your life. Because basically when they go to school, then they're thinking, I should be having a great time, and may not be having a good enough time, or my friends look like they're having a better time than me, or they're looking at Facebook. So I think it's important to align those expectations and to talk about, yeah, college can be really, really fun. And at the same time, sometimes, most of the time, actually, there are bumps along the way. It's not always easy. I like to compare it to the New Year's Eve. I call it the New Year's Eve effect. So, on New Year's Eve, where you're supposed to go out and have the greatest night of the year, I just never do. I usually stay home. I watch TV because I know I can never meet that expectation. That's sort of how I think we want to talk about college to students, is really aligning and making it a real conversation. A lot of the media and movies portray college freshmen, and on social media, TV, they show them having a ball, having an awesome time. And that may happen, but they never show the student that just is sitting there wishing they had been invited to the party, or not being included in something, or sitting and studying. People rarely post those pictures, or the poor grade, or the possibility that they overslept for classes. So I think that relaying this and aligning that expectation is important. One of the things we know is 45% of college students reported that it looked like everybody else had it figured out but them. So about half of the population thought that they were the only ones that didn't have it figured out. And I think that's a really important thing to tell college students. I know, I think it's important to tell them, we all have days, present company included. And it's really important that we are realistic And we know that people post in this day and age, and they portray the best in themselves often, and not necessarily the things that they're struggling with. One of the other things with aligning expectations is I think to validate concerns. It's really easy when your child looks at you and says, I'm really anxious. What if this happens? Or what if I don't know? What if I don't do well? And it's very easy as a parent to reassure them, to say, oh yeah, like you'll be great. You got through high school. You're always a good student. It's okay to point out that they're a good student, but we also want to hear, what is it that you're concerned about? And you know what? I think it's pretty normal to be concerned or nervous. And what are the things that we could do to make you feel better about going away and doing these things by yourself? And those could be very concrete things. They could be emotional things, but at least there's an open conversation. And I think that part's important. So another piece, the second thing is to encourage problem solving. So problem solving is the ability to be able to face a situation that you don't know how to fix. And one of the things that we want to do before students go away, or even while they're away their freshman year, is to validate the existing skills they have, their abilities, and their past successes. So being able to look at them and say, you know what, you were able to problem solve in this situation with that teacher. You went and handled it yourself. Or this was a situation where you've done this before, you could advocate for yourself. And by doing that, we're pushing them to start advocating or taking care of themselves or fixing things without doing it ourselves. And that's a really important part, is to, as parents, start not fixing everything for them, allowing them to try, and even sometimes allow a natural consequence. So, you know what, if they're learning to do the laundry and they put the red and white in and they have pink underwear, you know what, that's not going to be the end of the year for them. We want to do it on low stakes things, of course. Acknowledging the acceptance of a bad outcome. My daughter this year was learning to cook. So I think it was HelloFresh. She had delivered every week, and she was cooking, and she was like really into it. But one night, and she's very perfectionist, so she'd get very upset if things don't come out right. One night, she really blew this one dish. And she looked at me and she's like, it's all ruined. And then she said, but we're going to eat it. And I learned next time I'll do it better. I could not have been happier with my child at that moment, because that was such a huge growth for her, is to just acknowledge, you know what, I'm not perfect. I made a mistake, and we can still have a nice night. So I was all over complimenting her, like, wow, I am so proud of you. Like, a lot of people would have been like, oh, this stinks. I'm not able to do this. We can't eat this. Our night is ruined. And now we're still having a great time and we're laughing about it. Another thing is to capitalize on our own ability to problem solve, or even model problem solving. So when we're in an instance, say, well, sort of narrate what we're doing. So yeah, this is complex. I don't know the answer to this, but we could try. I'm going to try 3 things. And sort of show steps to problem solving. Show how, as adults, we don't always know it all. They don't see all that going on in our head, but when they see us as human and working through it, that helps them realize how they can do it as well. And then another step is to look out for avoidance. That's a key one for anxiety, is check and see what some students avoid. Maybe they'll never walk into a classroom late. Maybe they avoid going into asking somebody a question. But kind of look at it, even ask, what are the things you avoid? Because those are the things that when they get to school, they may have to encounter for the first time. So the next piece is cultivating life skills. So when we talk about life skills, they seem like simple, like we should all know it. Why are we even talking about this? I mean, everybody can learn to do the laundry. I got into a really good school. I could do laundry. I could, keep track of money. Everybody's done it. And that is kind of true. The problem is with college, we're learning all those things all at once. And it's a lot of new things all at once. And I'm going to take it off of college students and give an example of me as a young adult. When I was young, I was a young mom. I got married, bought a house, and had a child, and started a new job within a year and a half. Now I was young, so I thought everybody does all these things. I could do it. I could figure this out. No problem. I got this. And one day I was trying to learn all these new things about babies and parenting and remembering things and daycare. And I forgot to put the garbage at the end of the driveway so the garbage man could get it. And for whatever reason that day, I felt like I just did not have it together. And the garbage man pulled up and I looked at my garbage pail up at the house and I just burst out in tears. Was it because I can't handle taking the garbage down to the end of the road? No. It was that I was doing too many new things at once. And when we do a lot of new things at once, we deplete our emotions. So we only have, we all have emotions and we're all vulnerable in some ways. And we have limited resources. When we learn new tasks, we deplete those resources. And when our resources are depleted, we become vulnerable to our weakest point. Some people, it might be sadness. Some people, it might be they get angry. Some people may not be able to pay attention to anything and lose that. Everybody has a different vulnerability. But what we want to do is have some practice in these life skills so that we're not learning so many things at once, so that the transition to college becomes more simple, or it's just not as traumatic. Even just learning to do the laundry before you go away, or learning how to manage money, or learning how to manage a credit card, knowing things like that. It's amazing, but sometimes we don't realize what our children don't know. We could be completely ignorant to the fact that they haven't learned something. So when we look at practical skills, what are some things that we could think about that may seem really simple, but they are important pieces to going away and learning? So one is time management, being able to get up with your alarm clock on your own, being able to delay gratification and do things that are important is a very important one. Being able to say, I'm going to study and then I'll go for my walk, or I'm going to study and then I'm going to go out with my friends. Electronic media management is one. being able to not be on the phone when you're studying, or not multitasking, and being able to concentrate, being able to know that you need breaks and schedule them. Money management is one that, knowing basics about finances, having an established plan. That's one that my son was fine with, but my daughter seemed to need a real solid plan and put that together. Managing responsibilities with increasing independence. So if the student is taking medications regularly, you may want to see them actually taking control of that and managing their own medications and taking them. Start letting them make personal appointments. Give them the name of their doctor that they have to go to, have them schedule it, and start allowing them to have control over their schedule. They may, believe me, I'm one of the people that sometimes gets no-showed for college students that I've told people to let them manage their appointments. But they do learn. Spend time away from home. Don't let college be the first time they're by themselves away, or even spending time alone at home. Plan with steps, letting them develop the pack list for school, developing the shopping list, giving them things that they have to do on their own. And another big one is travel reservations. If you're going away this summer before senior year, allow them to engage in making the travel arrangements, or flights, or booking a hotel. And because a lot of times college students have to travel while they're in college. So if they've done it, at least they're like, oh, well, it's different this time. I'm going to a different place, but at least I know I can do this. The last thing is advocating for self in different venues. Being able to email a professor to clarify something, even practicing that while they're in high school is really important. Like, okay, so email your teacher and ask them, or go talk to them after class. Being able to say, I didn't understand something in class. One of the things, if I'm treating somebody with social anxiety or who has trouble advocating for themselves, I'll have them order food and then change their mind or change their order. Or if something isn't right, have them send it back. And the last thing is sometimes if they have social anxiety, or if they're anxious about advocating for themselves, I'll have them actually make a phone call to some place and ask a really basic question, or a silly question, like calling Starbucks to reserve a table, or walking up at Starbucks and ordering pizza. And why would I do something like that? Most of the times we think that something horrible is going to happen, but really the person at Starbucks usually says, yeah, we don't do that. And when I'm with my patients, they usually think it's really funny. I am not advocating for prank calls here, but we do want to show them that, we all make mistakes, we all do silly things, and the outcome typically is not catastrophic. So that's it for my section. I'm going to let Dr. Lippman start the next section.
Sure. Dr. Breda, you may have to advance slides for me, if that's okay.
Oh, really? I can't.
Yes.
You can't?
I could share my...
Don't worry, I'll do it.
Yeah, you may need to. So in addition to empowering teens and young adults to be able to do some of these concrete skills on their own, we need to be able to develop the ability for self-care. And self-care is a bit of a buzzword these days. I think it gets thrown around a lot. But in this particular context, what I mean by self-care, and we could actually go to the next slide, what we're talking about is really the ability to manage physical health, to be able to self-soothe in times of emotional distress, to cope ahead with anticipated challenges, and to build positive relationships. So we'll go through each of these bullet points today and talk a little bit more about what each one of them means. So we could go to the next one. So the first thing that I want to say about physical health is that this probably sounds very straightforward and very obvious. We could look at the slide and we could say, yeah, we all know that we should get sleep and we should exercise and we should eat well. But in this context, I want us all to be thinking about physical health in a framework of emotional resilience and how it relates directly to emotional resilience. So, I want everyone who's listening to this or who's watching to think about a day, and maybe that day is today, where maybe you were sleep deprived or you hadn't eaten anything that day, or maybe you were feeling under the weather. And it felt like if one more person asked you for one more thing, or if there was any additional minor inconvenience, that you were just going to snap. And I think we've all been there. And the reason for that is that when we're not taking care of our bodies and when we're not sleeping well and we're not eating well, these are what we call emotional vulnerability factors. And I think Dr. Brader, gave a really great example of this before, even with the taking out the garbage example. So the reason that physical health is so important, it's not separate from emotional health. They're actually really directly related. And so when we're engaging in balanced eating, when we're paying attention to how we feel after we put certain foods in our bodies, when we're getting adequate, consistent sleep, when we're doing something every day to just move our bodies and get exercise, when we're taking care of illness, all of these things are almost like taking a daily vitamin to kind of boost our emotional immunity. That's how I like to think of it. So taking care of our physical health becomes a buffer so that when stressful things happen, we are not as reactive and we feel like we have the resources to be able to handle some of those challenges. So if we go to the next slide. So in terms of sleep, sleep is a real challenge. I think it's a real challenge for all of us, and especially in college. The urge to stay up all night and socialize, or sometimes even in a perfectionistic sense, there could be a peer pressure to pull all-nighters and to feel like, if I stay up all night and I study, then I'll do really well and it'll be great. But this ends up being counterproductive because not only do we need our sleep for our concentration and our energy, but like we were saying before, if we sleep well, that's actually going to help us to be able, from an emotional standpoint, to cope with stress the next day. So trying your best to regulate sleep, to sleep 7 or 8 hours a night. I think some research suggests that for teens, it's even more, closer to 9 hours is ideal. And trying not to keep an erratic sleep schedule, but really going to bed and waking up at a similar time every day becomes really crucial. Dr. Brader really touched on these next two bullet points before, but this really relates back to what we discussed in terms of mastery, but being able to call and make your own medical appointments. And if talking on the phone is something that elicits anxiety, then trying and practicing that now. And I think for parents, being able to, in a validating and encouraging way, try and shape that behavior earlier on. Managing medications we discussed. And it's also important to just locate some resources on or near campus, because you don't want to wait until a time when you're already sick or you're already in crisis to figure some of these things out. And this will tie into what we'll talk about in a few minutes in terms of coping ahead. But some things that may be helpful to keep in mind is locating a pharmacy near or on campus, mapping out, knowing the location of the student counseling center and the health center on campus. And in a lot of schools, sometimes these are intertwined in the same space, and identifying some doctors that are covered by your insurance. So this is why physical health is so important. And I want to talk also about self-soothe. And self-soothe is a skill that I think even farther into adulthood, some of us just don't necessarily learn. And I think it's really useful for all of us because we're all human. And, we talked about normalizing challenges before, and sometimes things become overwhelming, and sometimes things inevitably become stressful. And so we have to have the ability to comfort and emotionally take care of ourselves and regulate our emotions when these things happen. And so I love this definition of self-soothe. I didn't create it, but being mindfully kind to oneself. I just love that. So this is actively, intentionally choosing to nurture yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed. And the best way to think about self-soothe is to really think about the 5 senses. So what are things that appeal to each of the 5 senses? And we encourage people we work with to actually make a self-soothe kit and identify some of these activities or some of these objects that can be used for this. But something that appeals to each of the 5 senses that you find comforting. So for sense of vision, looking at photos of happy times, looking at pictures of beautiful scenes, going outside and sitting on a bench and people watching, or looking at nature around you. I once worked with someone whose favorite version of self-soothe was looking at magazines, which was a lot of fun because magazines aren't really a thing anymore. But she would go to CVS. She would come home with a bunch of magazines. She'd light a candle or put her lamp on. She would kind of take a little bit of her favorite snack and sit there and look through magazines and take an hour or a half-hour break from the intense work she was doing. For hearing, I know my favorite version of that is just putting on a pair of headphones and maybe putting on my favorite music loudly and just kind of immersing myself in that and blocking out the world just for a few minutes. Some people like audiobooks, calling a friend or family member whose voice comforts them. Sense of smell, your favorite perfume or cologne, putting on some lotion you like. If you like to bake and you're in an environment where you can do that, baking some cookies. For taste, we just want to mention the caveat that, we're not trying to mindlessly eat a whole bag of Milky Ways here. We want to eat mindfully and in moderation, but mindfully eating, treating ourselves to a food or a snack that we really enjoy. We kind of want to avoid probably caffeine and alcohol that could kind of affect our mood, but everything else is fair game. And touch, curling up with a fuzzy blanket, putting on our favorite soft pajamas, asking someone for a hug or kind of giving ourselves a hug could be soothing. And so, I think the important thing with this skill is that we're balancing it with problem solving. So the idea here, I don't want to convey that we are curling up under the covers for 5 days straight and just self-soothing and avoiding the rest of the world and avoiding all of our stressors. We're not doing that. We're using this as a tool to emotionally regulate. So sometimes we're just feeling too distressed to be able to solve the problem, and we need to take a time out and be able to self-soothe first for a little bit and then revisit the problem. And we could also use this as a reward after problem solving. So sometimes we have handled a stressor and maybe we're burnt out and we need a break. And so we can use this skill in that way as well. So we can go to the next one. So coping ahead with challenges. This is another one that I think sometimes seems like it's really straightforward, but it's something that I think a lot of the times we don't necessarily think to do. And, I think when Dr. Brader and I were planning this, we were kind of debating, well, does this fall under mastery or self-care? And the answer is that I think it falls under both, because I think it's a really empowering skill that fosters independence when we're able to do it. But the idea here is what it sounds like. If we anticipate that there are going to be obstacles, or we're anticipating that there's going to be a situation that's going to be tough to deal with, we can make a plan of what's going to get in our way, what's going to be tough about that situation, and what are we going to do when we encounter those barriers. And, so for example, if let's say yesterday I was really anxious about giving this presentation, and, I may have been, let's say I was catastrophizing and I was ruminating about it. And I was just sitting there getting more and more nervous, thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do this. And they're never going to invite me back to speak. And I'm just going to be judging myself the whole time. I'm going to forget everything on my slides. It's a natural reaction when we're feeling anxious. But if I get wrapped up in all that catastrophizing and kind of ruminating, it's probably making me more anxious, and it's not necessarily helping to empower me to think about what I can actually do to make it a better situation for myself. So we tend to teach cope ahead in steps. And the first step is to just identify what barriers are going to get in your way. And this could be external things. I don't know, if there was a technological glitch on Zoom tonight, that might be an external barrier, but also internal obstacles. So this could be thoughts, you know, maybe you expect that you're going to have insecure thoughts. You're going to think that you're not good enough or that you're incompetent. You know, emotions, I'm going to be anxious, I'm going to be frustrated in this situation. And whatever behaviors we expect we might do, avoidance, you know, whatever that might be that might get in the way. So we can think about these things and then ask ourselves, well, what will I do when I encounter those barriers? And write it down. So we really advise people to actually write down this plan. What strategies will you use when you become overwhelmed? You know, what will you do? So maybe for this presentation, I would take a minute before I started, and I would take a few deep breaths, and maybe I would validate myself. Maybe I would remind myself, yeah, I'm nervous and it's normal to be nervous. And maybe I'm only anxious because this is something important to me. I could cope ahead by really practicing my presentation and practicing, maybe even improvising it without notes, so that I feel more empowered, that I feel more confident. Even if there is a glitch, or even if I forget my slides, I'll know what to do. So we'll write down a plan of all the things we want to do to cope with the barriers, and then rehearse the situation in our minds and imagine ourselves actually coping effectively. And that's important, because it's one thing to just talk abstractly about what we might do if we feel a certain way. And it's another thing to vividly imagine ourselves feeling that way and imagine ourselves being in that situation and being able to cope with it. So imagining what you would say, what you would do, how you would do it, and practicing relaxation when you're done coping ahead, because that could be a bit stressful. So the idea here is to identify these things, write them down, and then put them away. And not dwell on them for the rest of the day. You can go to the next one. There we go. So building positive relationships is just the last thing I want to touch upon. When we're feeling connected to other people and we feel like we have a support system, we do better. It's good for stress tolerance, and it's also important for our sense of identity and self-confidence. Cultivating one or two close relationships is a lot better than having, you know, hundreds of Instagram followers. And we could probably talk all day about social media, and it would be beyond the scope of this presentation. But, you know, having a few close relationships, also doing things to build a sense of community. And sometimes the best way to build community really is to put ourselves in situations where that community can happen. So just getting out there, joining a club, going to an event, volunteering, playing a sport, doing something where you're going to be surrounded by other people, and you may have to try a few different things. Staying in touch with family, of course. And I added on here getting to know your professors, just because I think that's one that is very easy not to do. And at some schools, it's harder than at other schools, but you don't have to be a major extrovert to do this. The idea is just forming a connection right off the bat, introducing yourself so that someone knows your face and name, going to office hours, or just going up to them after class, so that this way also, if a situation arises down the line in the semester and you need to advocate for yourself or get help, you've already formed that connection. So it really creates a support system. The last slide, Dr. Brader, if you want to go to it, is just a wrap up. So I want to leave time for questions. I think we talked about most of these things, just anticipating bumps, having realistic expectations. You know, one thing that I just want to highlight that Dr. Brader did mention earlier, but that last bullet, walking into class late rather than skipping because you were late. It's very easy for us to get into cycles of avoidance. And so I guess the theme there is to avoid avoiding. It's okay if you're already late, still go to class. If you missed class last week and you're feeling a little anxious or ashamed, avoid avoiding, show up at the class. So that's really the message that we wanted to send there. But yeah, let's leave time for questions.
Great. Thank you both so much for sharing all of that fantastic information. For our wonderful attendees, if you have any questions, you could pop it into the Q&A. I'll give you guys a minute to think up or take time to type in what's on the top of your mind. So in the meantime, if you guys need any inspiration in your questions, for I see a lot of thank yous coming in, which is always the best form of question, right? Getting that thank you that this was great information. But for our parents, if their children, or I don't like calling them children, right? They're adults at that point. But if they're teenagers, children, adults are, if they're noticing that they're experiencing some behaviors, some anxieties that you talked about earlier, but they're not, their child isn't really identifying that those are an issue, how can a parent bring that up and start the conversation?
Britt, do you want me to handle it? Okay, I'll take it.
Sure.
So if we're noticing that, the question was if we're noticing that a young person is avoiding.
Yeah, if they're avoiding, if they have any anxieties, but they haven't really come out and said that they may need some help, how can we guide them in that direction?
So I think I might start with first, saying all the, making sure I'm leading up with positive things, validating their strengths. And then maybe just querying in a curious way. Like, hey, I noticed that you didn't do that. Was that purposeful? Was that, and sort of follow up with some subtle questions, rather than saying, I notice you have social anxiety, so I think we should start working on that. And perhaps we should start a hierarchy of exposures. And, so going in with, were you uncomfortable there? Or just certain things. I find that sometimes as parents, or at least with my own kids, my inclination is to jump in and say what I think they need to do to fix it. And I think one of the best skills I've learned over time and developed as a parent, my children, I'm an empty nester, I have older children now, but one of the best things I've learned is to bite my tongue or my cheek, and not give too much information and wait for them to say, yeah, I did feel uncomfortable there, or I don't get that, or sort of just be a little bit more patient when querying.
I think that's also where modeling becomes important, kind of like we were talking about earlier, and being able to model, conversations about emotions or our own vulnerability. So if we're doing something that's stressful, we want to model maybe that we can problem solve, but also that it is stressful. I'm feeling nervous about this, and I think I got it.
Great, thank you. We do have another question as well. This question, maybe we'll start with Dr. Lippman this time. We'll switch it up. You were talking a little bit about introverts and extroverts before. So the question is, my son is an introvert. He would rather stay in his room and on his phone than socialize with people. What can I do to help him?
It's a good question. My first thought is, yeah, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. And also, yeah, you want to encourage getting out of the room a little bit. We talked about, just exercise, and we know the importance of behavioral activation too, and just being active. So, I think if there are activities that you can suggest, even doing together that are appealing, I'm going to go out for a walk. You want to come? You want to go get lunch? I think just facilitating conversation. So instead of, not necessarily criticizing, you can't stay in your room all the time, but maybe even just asking, like, how's your day? What's going on? And engaging in conversation, maybe to pull them out of that a little bit, I think are all good things to do.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions. I'll give folks maybe another minute or so if they have any additional questions in that time that we wait to see. I did see one question that would the slides be shared? We will definitely share the recording. We will, when we send a wrap up next week with the recording available, we'll touch base with our providers, see if they're able to share their slides or if not, some resources. But the recording has the slides in there, so it should be about the same. So all good there, definitely accessible after the presentation. I want to thank you both, Dr. Brader and Dr. Littman, for taking time this evening and sharing this great information. Everyone seemed to really get a lot out of it and are really looking forward to sharing the recording with others. So thank you. And we appreciate your time so much. For our parents who are still hanging out with us, we do have our next session of our college conversation series on Tuesday, October 19th at 7 o'clock. That'll be talking about drugs, alcohol, and kind of avoiding the appeals and pressures of frat life and sorority life. So looking forward to that as well. You'll receive information if you don't have that already in the wrap up. But thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to our speakers for giving us your time, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.